Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me. As Mary was saying, please feel free to jump in and ask questions, um, either by raising your hand. You can turn off your mic and interrupt me, or use the chat feature. I'm really excited to chat today about boundaries. It's something that's so important and something that's so challenging for many of us to feel comfortable doing. So I'm more than happy to share with you some kind of tips and tricks. So of course, we're going to learn how to be accountable to our own needs. And that's what setting boundaries is all about, and knowing your limits. Okay, so the goal of the discussion today is obviously to discuss those things, as well as discuss the need for self-compassion and how to assertively be able to say no and times where you feel like you need to say no. So first, we'll kind of define what a boundary is, why they're important, who sets them, and how to set them. And then we'll get into self-compassion and case study, where there'll be an opportunity for some discussion as well. So boundaries. So of course, this image is like a physical boundaries, and we see those all over society and from day to day. Personal boundaries are more imaginary. So it's an imaginary line that kind of separates your space from someone else's space. Your physical space, your feelings, your needs, and your responsibilities. So it's a kind of your own internal way of telling people how they can treat you and what's acceptable for you and what's not acceptable for you. So there's different types of boundaries that each of us have. So some are emotional, so that's kind of protecting your own emotional well-being. Physical, so protecting your physical space. And of course, a lot of us are familiar with that. Over the last couple of years, it's been something that's kind of, we've all grown to know kind of that, what 6 feet looks like, right? Like we don't have to get our rulers out anymore. We kind of, that's our defining physical space that, science has defined is comfortable for us to be within. There's also sexual boundaries that each of us has, and that kind of protects our own safety. Workplace, so protecting your ability to do work without interference or drama, and that it's only for like a set amount of time. It's usually defined. It's usually defined by kind of a contract or an agreement that you have with that workplace, and so kind of you need to adhere that boundary with your employer. Material, so protecting your own belongings. So obviously, we lock our places of residence. We tend to kind of protect what we own and what's ours. And time. So this one is challenging, kind of protecting our time, and defining what that is, not allowing others kind of misuse our time or to define for us what's acceptable. So perfect example of this is if someone, calls you and says, I need to chat with you for 5 minutes, and then you realize that it's well beyond 5 minutes, has actually been more of an hour, but then kind of not knowing where to go from there, or if you should say something, and if so, what to say. So that's kind of what boundaries are. Why are they important? So there's lots of reasons and lots of benefits to setting good kind of healthy boundaries, which everyone's definition of what a healthy boundary is will be different. So, mine will be different from yours, will be different from Mary's, will be different, for each one of us. And it's largely dependent on how kind of we were brought up and what we're comfortable with, and lots of like things that happen in our life that makes one of us have, boundaries that allow for more people to get closer to us, and some of us like to remain kind of distant, and it's all okay. They're important because they allow you to be true to yourself and allow for self-respect. Having healthy boundaries for yourself is a form of self-care. It creates realistic expectations with those that you have relationships with or strangers, and it allows for safety, so emotional safety and physical safety. So this goes hand in hand with kind of like anxiety or worry thoughts. So some people kind of that don't have healthy boundaries kind of get caught in situations and afterwards tend to overthink like, oh, I should have done that differently, or I could have, or I would have. Where if, it's set out from the intention of what the relationship's going to look like, then you're less likely to have those kind of afterthoughts that tend to keep us up at nights about would have, should have, and could have. For many of us, setting boundaries is a challenge because we don't want to hurt others. So many of us are people pleasers, but this comes at the expense of hurting ourselves. So that going back to that kind of self-care piece around, why that's important to kind of put your needs first and allow them to be known. Research suggests that the violation of personal space can cause discomfort. Personal experience tells us that discomfort can cause boundary violations, which lead to anxiety and fallout in relationships. So personal and professional relationships. So all that to say, kind of what I was explaining before about the anxiety piece, it's like the more people violate you, the more it's going to kind of cause negative thoughts. And then you might kind of, take a step back from being around people and engaging in relationships, engaging in society, which could then even lead to feelings of like a low mood or kind of a more depressed state. Because you're just kind of avoiding at that point in order to kind of not hurt people's feelings because, you're not sure how to kind of set those boundaries. So who sets boundaries? So kind of as mentioned, every person sets their own boundaries and everyone's boundaries are completely unique to them. But some boundaries are common and kind of well known across communities, across cultures. So what's socially acceptable kind of one place or time might not be the same as what's kind of socially acceptable in another place or time. And those things are kind of like learned to us through society, through kind of who raised us and what kind of the norms are. For how one kind of ought to be, and but not everyone kind of adheres to that, right? So some things are commonplace and the majority will follow, and then others need to be kind of reminded. So sometimes you'll see like signage in community spaces, like if it's a quiet zone, like a library, for instance. Most of us know that there's a certain tone. That's kind of the expectation or the boundary of that space. But if you've never been to a library before, you wouldn't know. So it would kind of be a time and a place where other people would have to kind of remind that one individual of, this is what the expectation is here. And it's kind of interesting because when it comes to physical places, or even the 6-foot rule that I was talking about in the last couple of years, that almost feels more comfortable in some instances than setting your own personal boundaries, because it's like, well, this is something that everyone needs to follow, or when it's something unique to you that might not be the same as someone else, it can feel a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more uncomfortable. Every person's tolerance and zone of comfort is different, so that needs to be respected, and we all have kind of bubbles, right? So everyone's bubble can be tighter, can be looser. And that can be interesting when you're really close to with someone and their kind of bubble is different than yours, right? You might know people in your life that are, touchy-feely huggers, and if you're not, or vice versa, it can lead to kind of like this discomfort. Like, for instance, I worked in a workplace where everyone was huggers kind of pre-COVID, and I never have been. So it's like every time I would walk into a meeting or walk into a social setting, I would get hugs, and I'm kind of like, oh, I'm not a hugger, right? But it's kind of like their expectation, their need is different than mine. So then that has to be brought to people's attention, right? That not all of our bubbles or our zones of comfort are the same. Some of us are open to sharing more personal information with other people that they've just met, and some are more guarded. And then there's a wide range in between with that as well, right? So we've all kind of likely encountered people where you meet them for the very first time, and you suddenly know kind of lots of things about their life, where other people you've known potentially as an acquaintance or a friend for years, and you don't necessarily, you're still learning things about them because it takes longer. Because of boundaries or different circumstances where they just don't feel as open and comfortable sharing things. So here comes the meat of it. So how to set boundaries. So all that stuff, you might have known what a boundary was, you might have known why they're important, but then when it comes down to the actual action that needs to take place in order to create these, the most important thing when setting a boundary is to be assertive. So using clear, assertive communication. So assertiveness is communicating and expressing your thoughts, feelings, and opinion in a way that makes your views and needs clearly understood by others without putting down their thoughts, feelings, or opinions. So the way to do that is to be direct, be firm, be positive, and be insistent. So using an I statement, making it about you instead of about them. So for instance, going back to the example about the hugging with my work colleagues, instead of saying like, you can't hug me, that becomes about them. And they might feel kind of offended that I'm saying you can't, because then it becomes about them. Where instead, if I use a language, I'm not a hugger, then it becomes about me. And that intends that the rule kind of applies to everybody. It's not you that I don't want to hug from, or you, or you, or you. It's that I'm not a hugger. The other example might be, I'm only able to stay for 10 minutes. I can have that to you by tomorrow. So instead of saying like, you need to have this done by this time, becoming someone else's kind of issue, it's more like, this is my time. And in order for me to deliver what you're asking of me, like, I need this set amount of time in order to make it work. So always start with I, be direct, firm, get eye contact if you can, being positive. So that whole, it's not you, it's me piece, and being insistent. So when someone kind of, if you put it out there, I'm not a hugger, or I can have that to you by tomorrow. And then someone asks further of you, and is insistent, it's okay to just say, you know what, this is my boundary. You can even name it what it is. This is what I'm comfortable with. I've made this decision. Always going back to that I. Boundaries only work if you enforce them and let them be known. And this one's important. It's important to never apologize for having a boundary or not feel guilty about it. So just because everyone's boundaries are different, and yours might not be the same as mine, who might not be the same as Mary's, who might not be the same as someone else's, it's not something you have to apologize for or be, guilty for, or kind of give it a second thought, because it's something that you've decided, something that you've put out there. And it's not about kind of others, what others think, whatever others feel. It's all about you and you protecting as part of your self-care. So if you need to put that on a sticky, if you need to put some sort of reminder for when you're out and you're trying to kind of set these healthy boundaries, that could be a good prompt too, that it's not about others. It's about me, this decision I've made, this is what I'm comfortable with, and it's self-care. That could be helpful. When you're starting to set boundaries, if you're someone that had kind of loose boundaries before and are kind of attending today because you'd like to set kind of tighter boundaries that feel healthier to you, starting with people that you're really close with can be one way. Or starting with people that you just meet because they don't know any different from you. So either way can be just as comfortable. Again, it's an individual choice, and it comes down to kind of your relationships best. But if you have someone that you are very close with, that you feel would be kind of open to having that conversation with about, what, I've been thinking a lot about kind of where I'm at, what I want to work on. And this is something that, I need to do for myself. That can go a long way. But then also, starting out now, you might say, okay, starting fresh, anyone new I meet, this is my thing. And then it'll start just like integrate into your life and become kind of just how we all know that 6 feet. It'll become known that like, this is my personal boundary. This is what I do. This is how I treat all, because it's what I need for me. So speaking of that, what I need for me, oh, sorry, I missed a slide on assertiveness. I went through it verbally. There is a slide here. So assertiveness is the courage to be ourselves and show the world our likes and dislikes, our thoughts, feelings, and shortcomings. It's about communicating honestly with family, friends, and colleagues. As we become more assertive, we drop the mask and show our true selves. We proclaim, this is who I am, this is what I feel, and these are my needs. So that's something that you might want to put on a sticky note to remind yourself of in the morning. So it all leads down to self-compassion as well. When we're assertive, when we kind of dig into what we need, we become more self-compassionate. So self-compassion, as we said, don't apologize for having a boundary. Don't feel guilty about it. Self-compassion entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves. When we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or being self-critical, we embrace it. And like, this is just me. This is who I am. Everyone has their own unique boundaries. It's what makes you you. So being able to just kind of like hug yourself in that moment, do some grounding. Be like, it's okay. Like, this too shall pass. This is me doing what's best for me in this moment. And like I said, right from the beginning, it's something that we're not comfortable doing because we're people pleasers. So we want to worry about what so-and-so thinks or what your friend thinks of your kind of new boundary. But when you're able to kind of step aside and not worry about that and just worry about what you need in the moment, you might find a lot of self-compassion there. Are there any questions up to now? Anything that's coming up for people that's kind of new information or stuff they want to spend a little more time on? We'll get into some case studies. Okay. All right, so the first case study, so you call a friend or another support person, ask them to vent because you had a huge family conflict and you don't know who else to talk to about it. You trust this person and they end up venting to you instead about their issues. When you end the conversation, you now feel worse because you're unable to discuss your own challenges and now feel burdened by theirs. So has anyone encountered something like this before? Have any insight about what you would do in this type of situation?
I wanted to raise my hand for started.
Yeah,
I was gonna say,
ahead.
I run into this a lot, and it's terrible. But you have to kind of maybe reiterate things in like a slow, calm manner, and not get freaked out by them misinterpreting what you're talking about. Maybe even like that might be why I feel worse. Sorry.
Yeah, so kind of reiterate what the point of the conversation was. So one of the indicators here is that kind of you called them, asked for help, right? So it's okay to say that directly. I'm sorry to hear that you're going through some stuff too. I called you because I'm really struggling today. I'm wondering if we can talk about that. Either talk about that first, and then we can potentially get into your issue if time permits, or we can schedule another time for you to be able to kind of confide in me. But right now, I'm really looking for some insight for myself. So there's different ways of playing it out, but just kind of, setting that boundary of as kind of it's coming, as people are, as this friend is kind of going on about their issue, it's okay to kind of interrupt, even though, the human nature in us might say like, okay, well, they're having conflict too, so I should sit and listen, right? It's okay to say, you know what, like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I really need to get this off my chest, and then let's come back to this, or let's earmark it for later, put a pin in it. And if your friend's not able to do that for you, that's okay too. Potentially you can call someone else that day that can hear you out so that you can get that piece off your chest that you're calling to kind of vent about. Okay, the second one. So you and your friend decide to join the same gym program, only it's at a time that your friend doesn't have access to transportation. So being a great friend, you offer to pick them up. For 2 weeks in a row, you end up waiting 15 minutes for them and you're late to the class. this happen for folks? Anyone experience something like that?
All the time.
Okay.
You ever have like serial, let's say siblings, who consistently are always kind of slow to get ready?
Right.
Yeah, it's okay though. You just don't. I mean, at least with them, you can almost teasingly tell them, "Oh yeah, I'm already at the gym. I'll see you later." Kind of, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Jokes, right? I usually
Yeah.
don't abandon my sibling. If I go out to a gym, we'll go together. I'll just end up, being a little late. It's okay. I'll try to push him to go earlier. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could offer kind of strategies to assist them if you have some to get ready quicker. Also, like reminding them that your time is just as valuable as their time, right? So, we decided to do this together. Let's support each other. But, I'd like to get there on time. So, wondering if we can make that happen. Otherwise I may have to go on my own this time because it's really important to me that I get there. And, you might have to find your own way.
I thought it's really relevant with, like, let's say a specialist appointment that somebody has, maybe you've arranged with them to take you there, and you really do want to make sure you get there on time, but they obviously don't respect your time. But it doesn't, mean that, you know what I mean? It's just like you feel, you don't feel disrespected. You're more anxious and worried and freaked out about, the like, if you have, for instance, a brain injury, like trying to make sure you know what to say properly so you don't, forget relevant stuff that they need to know.
Yeah,
You're
like when
getting
it's a
kind of
specialist
thrown
appointment. Yeah,
off.
for sure.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of bad things wrong with good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that was like protecting your time, kind of indicating that, you need to be somewhere at a certain time. You appreciate kind of the support and someone, coming with you for a variety of reasons, but that being there on time is something that you require. Yeah.